your guard. There are older and fouler things than orcs in the deep places of the world.
Everything out of the ordinary is to be reported.
Fiery the angels fell. Deep thunder rolled around their shores.
It may just be my imagination. Whatever it is that's watching, it's not human.
We are all now programmed for perfect happiness. Perfect happiness. Perfect happiness. Perfect happiness.
Quite an experience to live in fear, isn't it? That's what it is to be a slave.
It's a hard world for little things.
What we do in life echoes in eternity.
You know, there was a time in this country when smart people were considered cool. Well, maybe not cool, but smart people did things like build ships and pyramids, and they even went to the moon.
The Great Conjunction is the end of the world! Oh, the beginning?
It was a church. Did you know that word? Yes, there were still churches when I was a child.
But all things that are exposed are made manifest by the light. For whatever makes manifest is light.
You now belong to God, no longer to the devil.
What you said just now is quite extraordinary.
You're listening to Beyond Extraordinary with Natalina.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Beyond Extraordinary. Per usual, I'm Natalina, and I'm really glad that you are listening to this episode today because it's going to be really, really good. I'm so excited to share with you this interview that I just did with Dr. Michael S. Heiser, one of my favorite people in the world. Not only is he a smarty pants, but he is also incredibly delightful person to know. So I really enjoy talking to him, and this is his second appearance on Beyond Extraordinary, and he just doesn't disappoint. So stick around for that interview, which will be coming up in just a couple of minutes. But first, let's get a little bit of business out of the way. I have to tell you, if I sound a little bit sniffly and a little bit scratchy during this introduction, I woke up today feeling kind of icky. And I don't know if I'm coming down with something or if it's allergies. I am a little bit allergy prone, and the weather has been wet and cold lately. The seasons are changing up here in the Dakotas, so it is quite possible that I'm suffering from a little bit of allergy ickiness. But I have to say, as much as I grumble and complain about the impending winter season, I really am enjoying this sort of in-between stage where it's just chilly, but it's not snowy, and it's not like super cold, but it's not warm. You know, just this really in-between sort of chilly stage. And I'll tell you why, because I really don't like to be warm. I mean, I like to be warm, but I don't like to be hot, like hot and sweaty and uncomfy. But I do like to be able to just put on a big baggy sweater and some comfy slippers and have a cup of coffee and just really, you know, that's like the ultimate cozy experience for me. So I love this sort of intermission between fall and winter, which is what I feel like it is right now. It doesn't really feel like fall anymore. It feels like we're a little closer to winter than fall, but it's just nice and crisp, brisk. Is that how you say it? Brisk? I think so. Anyway, so let's see. Let's cover a little bit of business here. So I know I've said this in the past few episodes. Now, don't hold it against me. I'm not a liar per se. I'm just a procrastinator. But the inaugural issue 1 of the Extraordinary Intelligence newsletter is actually almost done. And so it'll be coming out in a few days. So this is your last opportunity if you want to get in on receiving the first issue of the Extraordinary Intelligence newsletter to go to extraordinaryintelligence.com. In the right-hand sidebar, you will see where there's a place for you to put your name and your email address in to get signed up for that, so you won't miss out. And remember, when you sign up, you're going to receive an email that is a verification email, and you have to click that link in that email in order to verify yourself as a real person and not a robot, or else a very intelligent robot who knows how to push buttons. You have to do that step, otherwise you're not going to receive the newsletter. And that would be a real crying shame, because I think it's going to be good. So do that. And like I said, that'll be coming out in a couple of days. Other than that, I've been blogging a bit. You'll want to go over to the extraordinaryintelligence.com website and check out my bloggy blog. There is, years of archives that you can pour through, but just on the front page, the home page, you'll find a fair amount of stuff to keep you busy for a while. And so do that. Also, I really, we're talking about the cold weather. And what does the cold weather make you think of? Me, it makes me think of snow. And when I'm thinking of snow, I'm thinking of beautiful white snowflakes. And when I'm thinking of white snowflakes, I'm thinking of a white Christmas. And when I'm thinking of Christmas, I'm thinking that there are some overachievers out there who have already started doing their Christmas shopping. And I want to speak to you. Not only is Natalina a blogger extraordinaire, and not only is she your wonderful hostess of Beyond Extraordinary, but she's also a self-proclaimed artist of the jewelry making variety. All of that to say, I have my own, I have a handmade jewelry boutique that I run and operate and design jewelry for and make the jewelry for. And you can find that online at extraordinaryboutique.com. I just revamped the boutique, so there's a little bit of stuff on there right now, and I've got about 10 new items that I'll be adding sometime later today that are all one-of-a-kind items, handmade by yours truly, and that if you wanted to support what I'm doing here with Beyond Extraordinary and with Extraordinary Intelligence, you want to help us keep the server running, help us keep the lights on, all of that, and maybe even help me get a new computer, which is desperately needed, shopping at Extraordinary Boutique is actually a really great way that you can help support Extraordinary Intelligence and Beyond Extraordinary, because it is a way that you can help us out and get something in return. Got it? Okay, so let's see. That's extraordinaryboutique.com. What else? Do we have anything else to discuss before we get into this fantastic interview? Well, some weeks back, Mike Heiser sent me a copy of The Portent, and I was really excited to read it. But I had to first reread The Facade, because I knew that it was going to be crucial and critical to the understanding and the appreciation of The Portent. And I ended up being so busy and so bogged down and so much stuff going on in my personal life, I just wasn't getting around to reading it, even though I really, really wanted to. And then finally I got almost all the way through it, but I hadn't finished it yet, and quickly approaching was a date that Dr. Heiser and I had set to do our interview. And just that day that we were going to do our interview, I had a complete technology meltdown. My computer just said, no, you're not going to interview anyone today. In fact, you're not even going to maybe interview anyone ever again. It was that kind of meltdown. Like, I thought it was maybe something from which I could never recover. And as a result, I had to postpone my interview with Dr. Heiser, and we rescheduled it, and it was actually really great. And as Dr. Heiser said to me in our personal correspondence, he doesn't believe in coincidences, and perhaps it was providence that this happened the way it did, so that I would have the opportunity to finish reading The Portent and be prepared in that way for just having a discussion with him. And I'm actually really, really grateful that it happened that way. I'm really grateful that I was able to finish reading The Portent and kind of absorb what it was all about before I spoke to Dr. Heiser about it. Because really, it's a remarkable book. The Facade and the Portent it's a remarkable saga. It's a remarkable series, very thought-provoking. It's going to put your brain to work. And that's good. I enjoy that. It's also just so full of adventure. It's so full of intrigue. The characters you come to know and love, and feel like you can relate to them in various ways. Overall, I just really enjoyed reading The Portent, and I feel like I came away from it with sort of a new set of eyes to look at the things that we explore in this niche where I tend to dwell, the quote fringe Christianity, if you want to look at it that way. Dr. Heiser, of course, speaks to that niche, but he obviously covers a variety of niches with his work. I mean, he's so involved in just the scholarly academic aspects of biblical research and translation and apologetics and all of this stuff, that his ministry really does speak to such a wide audience. And I'm hoping that in this episode, those of you who maybe haven't had the opportunity to get familiar with Dr. Heiser's work, for whatever your reasons may have been, I'm going to encourage you to take a look at the things he has to say, and especially read these two books, because really they are going to open your eyes in such a way that I think you're going to come away with questions, probably, and that's good. It's good to ask questions. It's great to have those questions, but it's also going to probably answer a lot of questions that you maybe had, or maybe didn't even know that you had. Is that cryptic enough for you? Well, let's go ahead and get into the interview with Dr. Heiser, because his way with words is perhaps a little bit more eloquent than mine, but I think you're really going to enjoy it. And for any questions you might have, please go to, once again, extraordinaryintelligence.com. You will see there's an entire archives of all of my previous episodes of Beyond Extraordinary there. There's also a contact link if you have questions for me. If you have questions for Dr. Heiser, you can go to his website, which all of his website and information is going to be found in the show notes of this particular episode. And at the end of the show, he will also give you his links, that kind of thing. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you will enjoy listening to what Dr. Heiser says as much as I did. God bless, and here we go. Oh, one quick other thing that I want to talk to you about before we get into the show. Oh, I faked you out there. So one thing that I don't think we talked about in the interview is that there's actually this riddle at the end of the Portent. Now, don't skip to the end, because there's going to be a major, massive spoiler if you skip to the end. But when you read through and you get to the end, there's a little riddle that you need to try to decipher. And along with the clue that Dr. Heiser provides at the end of the Portent, you will also find that there's an additional clue in his workbook that goes along with the Portent, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. But I'm mentioning this because it has consumed me. I'm like trying to figure out the answer, and so far I'm not sure that I'm at anywhere near on the right track, but it's so exciting to try to figure these things out. And of course, he really challenges you to just really try to pull the answers from the text that he provides. And so definitely, if that's an additional incentive for you out there who like riddles, there is something to figure out once you finish the Portent. It's just, I want that. Oh, and the prize, if you figure out the riddle, is that he says that he will name a character after you in the next book of this saga. So, ooh, exciting, right? But don't try too hard, because I kind of want to be the one to figure it out, right? I'm just saying. But, yeah, give it a whirl That's really fun and exciting thing that I forgot to mention. And also, since I'm still talking, believe it or not, go and follow me on Twitter, because I'm actually tweeting a little bit more than I used to. I'm trying to be more active in Twitter, and now I'm kind of thinking I'm getting the hang of it a little bit. And so, but I just need more people to interact with me on Twitter to keep me more engaged on Twitter. So if you want to tweet me, you can go to extraordinaryintelligence.com, and there's like a little section where it says like let's be friends or something in the right hand sidebar, and you'll see a little icon for Twitter. Follow me on Twitter, and we can tweet all day long. And also, you know who else is really into Twitter? Dr. Michael S. Heiser. He is a Twitter fanatic. So when you're following me on Twitter, follow him too. It's really cool. Okay, now on with the show. So several months ago, I had the pleasure of talking to Dr. Mike Heiser about his work, his testimony, his research, and it was one of my favorite interviews I've done so far on Beyond Extraordinary. And I'm really thrilled that today I get to welcome Dr. Heiser back to Beyond Extraordinary to talk more specifically about his latest work, which is The Portent. It's the sequel to the novel The Facade. And I personally found it to be an absolutely thrilling book. So I'm really excited to talk to Mike about this book and kind of his thought process behind it and some of what he hopes to achieve with this story. Those of you out there who haven't read The Facade, you need to pick that up first. Read it and then pick up The Portent, and I guarantee you will not be disappointed. So without any further ado, thank you so much for joining us once again on Beyond Extraordinary, Mike.
Thanks for having me back, Natalina.
So my first question is of the utmost importance. I cannot be the first person to tell you that these novels of yours would make incredible movies. As I read them, they just like unfolded like a film in my mind's eye. So when are you and Brian Godawa going to sit down and get to work on the screenplay? Like, seriously, have you thought about transitioning them to film?
This is a serious question. Have you been talking to him?
I have actually not even brought this particular topic up, but I did just talk to him yesterday to book him on the show.
Okay.
But that's why he's at the forefront of my mind.
All right. Well, what can I say here?
Did I just like break some news?
Kind of, sort of. The short answer is that you're correct. You are not the first to say that. I mean, I get emails like that with a good bit of frequency, and I mean, I'm not saying it because it's my book or they're my books, but I agree. I think they'd make really good movies, and I say that because again, when I wrote The Facade, I was new to fiction. You know, everything I'd done was academic to that point. And so to help me, I basically wrote each chapter like I was watching it. In other words, I had to imagine like a movie scene in my head and then try to write that. Right. And I did the same thing with The Portent. So there's a good bit of sort of reasoning behind why when people read it, and again, I get emails like this a lot. It just feels like a movie, you know, that kind of thing. So there is a reason for that. Brian and I have talked about coming up with a script, and I guess I can say that is more than just talk, but I don't have anything concrete to report. I think that's adequately vague.
Well, I can assure you Brian didn't say anything to me about that, so I guess maybe I tapped into it.
I can neither confirm nor deny.
Oh, that's funny. Well, I do hope that you guys do continue to explore that, because it would be a really, really adventure and intrigue, and it would be something that would appeal to, such a wide audience. So very cool and exciting. Now, I don't know if you know this about me, Mike, but I actually live approximately 70 miles north of Fargo, North Dakota.
I saw that somewhere just today, and I thought, you got to be kidding! She's in North Dakota.
People actually live here, and it would be a really great place for people to hide out and live relatively anonymously. So
I had a friend, a guy I roomed with in college for a while, who was a medical doctor, general practitioner in Northwood, North Dakota,
mm-hmm.
which is just sort of your typical North Dakota small town. And, we visited them a couple times, and that is actually where North Dakota, where the idea for the ending of the facade, and of course where this one picks up. I thought this would be a great place to just go if you never wanted anyone to see you again.
The funny thing about Northwood is it's probably within 20 miles of me. It's so close
mm-hmm.
to where I live, but it's just like one of those places where I've never actually been there. I've never even seen a sign on the interstate to go there. I just happen to know that it's there. So it would be a really good place to get lost, I think.
Yeah.
But that's so funny. We so rarely up here get North Dakota doesn't get a whole lot of mention, other than unless people are just totally making fun of us, like the popular series and movie Fargo and all of that. Otherwise nobody ever remembers that we're here. So, in fact, just as one last note on that, I actually have gotten more than one email from people that accuse North Dakota of not actually existing. Like, there are people who truly believe that it is like a government secret conspiracy, that this is like a militarized zone and nobody actually lives
right.
here. So it's really weird. But
kind of like those cities in China that they build that aren't actually populated, and
right.
Yeah. Well, that's great.
It's so true. So thanks for the shout out. We really do exist. Yeah. So I was kind of a late bloomer to reading The Facade. I'd heard endless times from endless people that it was a book that I just had to read, and for some reason I dragged my heels in getting around to reading it, and that might be just like the latent hipster in me that sort of defiantly puts off reading or looking at things that people try to convince me to do. It's pretty silly, but anyway, I finally sat down to read it, and I couldn't put it down. I finished it in less than 48 hours, and I'm actually a relatively slow reader because I like to really just, take my time, and this one I just couldn't put down. It's just an incredible work, and I struggled to figure out how The Portent could live up to it because I liked The Facade so much, and I actually found myself even more riveted by The Portent, and I'm not just saying that. It's so true. It really touches on every single area of my personal interest. So I'm trying to think about how to interview you about this book without divulging spoilers, because as I read it, every little section came just like as a new revelation to me, and I just don't want to take that away from the audience. So what I will say is that you cannot, to the audience, you cannot read The Portent without reading The Facade first.
That's true.
And from here, I'm going to let you tell us what you can about the story as it transitions from the events of the first book into the second.
All right, well, we'll do that, and then there will probably be things that pop into your head that you see as a good rabbit trail or trajectory. I mean, I naturally felt the same way sitting down to write The Portent, because I thought, am I going to be able to do this again? Because the first one, and we should talk about the first one too, in case people haven't read that. It's basically what it's about, but the first one, I had large chunks of time to write because, again, I skipped out on the first year of my dissertation at Wisconsin to write The Facade. I was just sort of burned out with grad school, and I thought, I know a good deal about, certain things, the biblical studies, ancient text, all this stuff that I did for grad school. But I'd always been interested in paranormal stuff. And as a grad student, I worked as a security guard. I had 3 or 4 jobs. I worked full time going through grad school, but the best one was the security job at the biotech firm, where I was all alone by myself in this building. And after I did my rounds, the rest of the time was mine. And I listened to Art Bell and, late night talk radio and all this sort of stuff. And I thought, you know what? I know enough about this stuff, because there are a few things like UFOs I had taken a serious interest in, that I bet I can throw all these things together and write a novel. And that's what I'm going to do. You just forget the dissertation. Who gives a rip for a year? And this is what I'm going to do. This time, I didn't have, huge chunks of time. So I'm wondering, can I do this if I only have an hour, here and there, and, all that sort of thing. But I found a method, and I think The Portent is a good read, just like The Facade was. So I was happy with it. I'm glad to hear others were happy with it too. But to get back to the synopsis, The Facade essentially asks 2 questions. This is how I like to explain it. The first question that it raises is, what would the impact be to traditional Judeo-Christianity if there was a genuine extraterrestrial disclosure? What would the impact be? So the character, who's basically, well, he's me, again, because I had to know at least one character in the book, again, because fiction was new, but he's put into a situation that is really incongruous. I mean, he's going nowhere in life. He's lost his job at a Christian institution for basically telling the truth. Just a number of personal tragedies that the reader eventually finds out. And he gets sort of swept into this covert world because of an association he had in college with a professor who happens to be now deeply embedded in the intelligence network of the U.S. government. And this is what he's thrown into. He gets thrown into this situation where, wow, what if what I'm looking at here is real, And the second question, as the character has to struggle with that, the second question is, well, what if we thought was a genuine disclosure is something a whole lot worse, and it is a facade, a very deliberate, orchestrated sort of deception. And again, without revealing anything about the facade, as it struggles with the second question, the character, his training actually becomes relevant. Again, you get exposure to the divine council idea, the real world, the real biblical theological world of the unseen realm. So those are the 2 questions that the facade deals with. Again, what if there's a disclosure, and what if it's something worse? And so the main character, again, draws on his background as a biblical scholar to help parse the events in the wake of especially the second issue, but also the first, and so the facade really gets into, these are serious questions. Could Christianity sustain an extraterrestrial reality? Again, what about the unseen realm? What's really going on there in terms of, again, the stuff you don't hear in church, that sort of thing. So at the end of the facade, the character, again, without giving anything away there, the character's quite isolated, with the exception of one other person that he encounters, and that is the lead female character. I think I can say this much, Melissa. So they are thrown into a situation where they've really got nothing else except each other, and it's a pretty awkward thing to have happen. I mean, there's, when I imagine people reading the facade when they're, waiting, for the portent to come out. This is one of the big questions. How is this going to work? This kind of thing, because it's very evident how he feels about her, but he's got some real issues, and of course she has a truckload of issues as well.
Yep.
And they're thrown into, again, this situation where they have to try to maintain anonymity. And that's part of how the Portent opens. What I wanted to do in the Portent, of course, is continue that. Their relationship, of course, is a thread that runs through the whole book, the whole Portent. And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that when we get to a point where you want to do that. But that's the sub theme, the subplot. But I wanted in the Portent because of the name. A portent is something ominous that's sort of over the horizon, something that's looming out there, an omen, that kind of thing. So I wanted to get into, all right, now that we're sort of in this situation where we know we're dealing with a superior, malevolent intelligence, but even the main character doesn't really know that. The reader knows that, but what the main character thinks is really a bad guy is much worse than a bad guy. And so, what do we do with that? If we were in this situation, again, since I get to sort of live the main character out, there's the perspective of what am I doing now? What's the point? But the Portent also gave me the opportunity to put myself in the role of the evil intelligence. And this is really where the theme of the novel, again, what's going to happen in the future? What's the plan? What does evil want to accomplish here? And how would they do it? So I got to put myself in that role and essentially ask myself, if I were the evil mastermind, what is my end game and how do I get there? And related to that, why do I choose this path? There's nothing standing in the way of the villain, or again, the evil intelligence here. He holds all the cards. So what would I do? And one of the things I want to accomplish in the book is there are a lot of Christians out there who think about end times, who think about end times tied to stuff like UFOs and, again, tied to, more bizarre things like Genesis 6 and Nephilim and all this kind of stuff. If I were the intelligent mastermind, I could do better than that. And I wanted to do that in the Portent. In fact, I'm not only going to do an end run around what you think, I'm going to use what you assume to be true. I'm going to use the propensities of your own thought process, your own theology. I'm going to use it to crush you. And so, again, the Portent is about how the main good guy character, Brian, again, just runs head on into this evil. And how that works itself out both in the immediate story, and also Brian is going to learn what the big picture holds, not only for him, but for everyone else. And there are decisions made by people on both sides that are going to directly involve him naturally. And as again, the evil character in it says, we could do this a lot of ways. We can get to the end game in a number of ways. This is the one that just is more interesting to me because it's the one where I get to hurt you. I get to make you suffer. You're going to know what is happening all around you. You're going to know it. You're going to see it. You're going to know it's just a scam. You're going to know what the end game is, and you will be able to do nothing about it. And so that is, again, in a nutshell, again, very, very ambiguous, again, because I want people to read the book to get all this. There's no way I could capture in an interview what's in the book. I mean, the book is just a huge amount of research. It took me over a year just to gather the research material. Writing a novel, to me, is like writing a dissertation. I think you could probably testify to that. Mm-hmm. And so it's just like the Facade. It was not marketing shtick. Everything in the book is real. And it doesn't come from Billy Bob's website who said he was abducted by aliens. It comes from peer-reviewed material. It comes from real stuff. What the fiction is of course the characters and how I connect all those dots. But again, I wanted to take this angle to try to sort of issue a bit of a wake-up call. What you think you know, you really don't know. And again, if I were an intelligent evil, and intelligent evil is a lot smarter than I am, but if I were the one calling those shots, I could use all of these things against you and enjoy it. So,
and I think it's safe to say that one thing that I really came away from with The Portent, of course, the main villain, the Colonel, I think it's okay to say that, you can read endless novels and see endless films, and you'll never encounter a more evil villain than the Colonel. He really is, as you say, he manipulates the emotions and the reasoning of the main characters. One thing I came away from this with is the idea that I think a lot of times, particularly working in this sort of fringy niche that I guess I work in, people are very single issue focused, and they can build an entire ministry around that, or very one note, so to speak, and they invest all of their time, energy, and intelligence in proving that one thing to be true. And I think it is important that in this novel, we find how dangerous that can be because of how easily you are setting yourself up to be manipulated if you're not able to see the forest through the trees, so to speak, that there is a real danger in thinking you have something completely figured out and then just running that one track, if you follow what I'm saying.
No, I am actually concerned about that in the real world of not just, again, Christians involved in this sort of thing, this trying to minister to people who are caught up in alternative worldviews and the occult and the paranormal and all this stuff, that you do, that I am involved in. I really have a concern that Christians put all their eggs in certain baskets. And if those things don't pan out, then what do you got left? And I'll tell you what you got left, because I've seen this. I've heard people say it at conferences, whether they're UFO conferences or some other kind of conference. They will draw the erroneous conclusion that since this thing they thought was correct, and I mean they just laid everything on the line. They were all in on it. And when it doesn't work out, when it doesn't pan out, when someone probes it for weaknesses and it's shown to have weaknesses, then their conclusion isn't, well, okay, I'll go back and rethink that. It's like, well, none of this can be true then.
Right.
I'm just bagging it. And I have just, if I had $10 for every time I heard someone say, I used to be a Christian until, and then I had this experience, or I read this book, or I saw Ancient Aliens, or, something like that. It's disturbing, that not just Christians who don't see these things, don't think well, but even people who do see these things and are into it, that they don't think carefully enough. Again, they put all their eggs in certain baskets, and it makes them vulnerable. And again, what I'm trying to do in The Portent is I am trying to subvert some poorly defended ideas. I'm trying to subvert, certain theological, eschatological expectations. I'm trying to subvert the notion that the best way to interpret prophecy is with a newspaper or American politics or something like that. It's not European foreign policy. That's not our guide for biblical hermeneutics and prophecy. Those are all distractors. And again, if I can see that an intelligent evil being who's bent on the destruction not of just people at random, but specifically the believer, if I can see that, they can see that too. And again, this is fiction. And again, this is why I have the characters say, look, we could do this in a number of ways. This is just the one I like. You're basically here because you entertain me. That's the only reason you're not dead. And again, that's useful again for the purpose of telling the story. But what I'm hoping people catch is the larger point that intelligent evil is actually intelligent. It's not cartoonish and stupid. It's not formulaic. It's not looking, it's not looking at what you post on your website and say, oh, gotta change plans now, or it just doesn't do that. It's just more intelligent. It's more sophisticated.
Right. And throughout the book, you really start to unravel some of the things that throughout history could be used and manipulated to that end by this intelligent evil. And before I get into that, I want to talk a little bit about the main character of Brian Scott, because he's just he's just a good person. I mean, he goes through various temptations, and he
tries to do the right thing.
He really does. He has had incredible hardships in his life, and ultimately he comes away having made decisions that do not compromise his morality. And he
pays dearly for them.
He really does. He does. And so, I think a lot of authors would be tempted to sort of, quote, spice things up by giving a character like Dr. Scott a proverbial fall from grace. He isn't perfect, and he has these temptations, and he acknowledges his shortcomings, but ultimately he stands firm in his convictions. And was this a conscious effort on your part to portray Brian this way? That seems like that was important to you.
It is, because, I think in the Christian world, how can I say this and not sound too nasty? It seems like because of what's published, because of celebrity Christianity, and I have a really, really visceral reaction to celebrity Christianity. I don't know why. I just don't do well with it. But we get the impression that the only people that God can really use are the ones who've screwed up their lives or played in the NFL.
Yeah.
That is just not true. The characters in the book are ordinary. They don't have superpowers. Okay, they do have skills. In the Portent, again, they have means to do certain things. And they basically just get off their butts and get stuff done.
Right.
It's like, look, it's clear what we need to do here. It's not going to be easy. It's going to hurt, but we should just do it. And there are thousands of people out there like Brian Scott that don't, again, they weren't a famous quarterback. They weren't a famous fill in the blank. They're not a superhero. Brian is just an ordinary guy. And again, he can be almost naive. He is me when I was in college. I wasn't even a believer until I went to high school, but I had enough garbage around me. I grew up with an alcoholic, morphine addict, just a number of stereotypes sort of rolled into one in my family. And it's like, I saw what these things could do to people. I just wanted to stay away from it. I didn't even have to be a believer to have any struggle, with it. That sort of thing. I could just see things like that pretty clearly. And so part of that is Brian. Again, it's a bit naive, and it's not to say that people who have screwed up their lives can't turn their life around. They can't repent. They can't, be empowered by God to do great things. We all know people like that. There's thousands of those too. But I think the spectacular nature of a person's fall sort of draws attention to them, whether they want that or not. And I think the best people who have, really fallen deeply are the ones that when the Lord takes them out of that and turns them around, are the ones that don't want attention drawn to it. To me, that's a more powerful thing than reliving all of that, for the sake of telling your story. Mm-hmm. But God can use all these types, but Brian's just an ordinary person, and ordinary people can get thrown into very difficult situations. And sometimes the only thing you can do is just do what you know is right, and sort of roll up in a ball and cringe because you're going to get run over by it. And just to believe that I'll survive through this, and we'll just sort of see what it looks like when it's over, and we'll just go from there. And that's essentially him. So that is deliberate.
And I find that Melissa, the character of Melissa, she, just like Brian, has had bad things happen to her in her past, but she takes that.
She went the other way.
It goes the other direction.
Yeah.
And I think it's so fascinating and really wonderful how these two come together in the conversations that they have and how their relationship blossoms, their friendship grows through that and finding where their similarities are and where they parted ways, so to speak. It really unravels in a believable way, because just as much as reading it, I can relate to Dr. Scott. There have been portions of my life where I could very much relate to Melissa as well, and the conclusions that she had come to throughout her life. So, in our last interview, you discussed your testimony, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes for anyone who missed it. But one thing that you discussed, which I found so moving, was the role of providence in your life. And in our personal conversation even, you have made the statement that you don't believe in coincidences, and I obviously would have to concur. The theme of providence is introduced near the beginning of the Facade, when Brian just believes that he is where he is for a reason, and the theme is highlighted throughout both books. In The Portent, I have it marked here. The character of Sebastian, who's a wonderful character in himself, he says that for the child of God, there is no such thing as an accident. And I want you to speak to your obviously intentional highlighting of the role of providence in the lives of your characters and what you wanted the reader to think about when it comes to the way God guides and intervenes in our lives.
Yeah, these are important themes in the book, and I think they resonate with people because, nobody's life is unprovidential. It's just a question of are you looking at your life that way? In other words, are you filtering the events of your life, in such a way that the filter of faith, the filter of belief, the filter of, that my life does have a purpose. It may not always be, or maybe even mostly be what I was hoping it would be, but I have a role to play. Frankly, it's just good biblical theology, but everybody can relate to that if they have their senses trained to it. We can't all relate to, again, either a spectacular fall or, a huge spectacular success in something, or fame, or, being in a position of authority and power, or having lots of money. That's part of people's lives, certain people's lives, but everybody, can again have their senses trained to this notion, this idea, and again, this point of theology that, the original intention of all this, again, going all the way back to Genesis, was that God would have a human family to go with his unseen family. Again, for those of you who've read my Divine Counsel stuff, this is 101 here. But, Eden is the dwelling place of God. It's not just the dwelling place of Adam and Eve. It's the residence of God. It's the HQ. It's the nerve center. And why would God come here? Because, well, he already has a family, the sons of God that are divine beings and so on and so forth. And now he wants, more members, and he wants them to work together. They're all at the same place where God lives. That's where he conducts business, the affairs of the world and the cosmos and all this stuff. And so the biblical theological message is that God, the Divine Counsel worldview that I refer to is really God's rule, and in the wake of the fall, the reestablishment of God's rule in the seen and unseen worlds through his human and non-human agents. Okay, that's what God is up to. If you want, what's the Bible about? That's what he's up to. And if you can grasp that, then life, where you're put, and the other imagers, and you were created as imagers of God, that are that intersect with your life, there's an intention behind that. There is something to do. There is something that you are supposed to accomplish. And God will have people intersect with your life, and he will have, I believe in the whole guardian angel idea. It's a biblical theological idea, but there are divine beings that intersect with our lives that try to influence us, maybe in more overt ways occasionally, and less overt. If you grasp this worldview, then the things that happen to you in life, by definition, there ought to be some discernible intent to them. And if you start to think consciously about that, well, why did I have that conversation with that person that I haven't heard from in 10 years? Well, I don't really know right now, but I'm going to put that away in the back of my head. And, I'm going to ask God to give me some clarity there, and something else will happen that'll fit with that will lead somewhere. Again, the secular world talks about living intentionally. And I'm using that language because that's familiar. It's a familiar bridge, again, to that sort of idea. But there's a theology that goes behind it, because there's a destiny to which it is being directed. And everybody can do that. So, again, that's part of the reason why the characters are the way they are. Again, nobody's going to, sprout wings and fly away and, go save somebody and do something superhuman here. It's not going to be a cartoon. It's going to be real people in some really tough situations, just trying to do the right thing, or they might do the wrong thing. They might make a mistake. They might not know what to do. But all of these things, again, will work together. But we just have to be able to, we have to want to discern that. And we're not omniscient. God knows that. We're not going to know why everything happens to us. But if we're thinking about it, and if we're prayerfully, again, really giving it attention, we will be able to discern, things that, that are the role that we're playing in this restoration, the restoration of the rule of God, and the reclamation of the nations, because of the gospel.
It's so important, and something that I, just on a personal note, have really come to grips with, even just over this past summer with my dad being ill. I'm seeing, God working through all of these different things, and it just changed your mindset a little bit. Don't think of things as unfortunate or coincidences or lucky or whatever, but that it's that this is, every little thing that happens has a purpose and a meaning, and you can learn from it, and you can use it as you go forward in life, and that it might be actually leading, even if it seems like an unfortunate or bad situation, it might be leading to something that you are supposed to be doing in the future. It's critical.
Yeah, and it's not just passive either. Oh, why did this thing happen to me? And if you believe this, then you're sooner or later you're going to realize that what I do is important.
Yeah.
I'm either going to be useful for advancing, again, the kingdom. God's rule is not a heavy-handed thing. I'm not talking about, let's set up a theocracy. I'm talking, the reason that God gave laws or puts boundaries in life is because he made us, and he'll know what the circumstances are under which that we will be the most happy. Okay, we are the most happy when we don't cheat on our spouses. We are the most happy when we don't steal things that don't, again, just very basic ideas that are really, that have a very wide theological ripple when you really start to think about them. But what you do matters in terms of your usefulness, and also in terms of what, you may not know, but I'm going to do this thing because, God might use this. I mean, he will use it in some way, but I might be able to really, understand why I'm doing this, because God can use that in that other person's life, because there's a connection here. Again, it's not just new agey nonsense. We're all connected. Mm-hmm. Well, again, in a theological sense, in terms of biblical theology, there's an element of truth to that idea. Now, it doesn't lead to where, again, Oprah wants you to go with it.
Right.
But again, there's this intentionality about it, about what's going on Earth, the connection with the spiritual realm and the earthly realm, and as in heaven, so on earth, all that stuff. The big theological issues, the big theological topics. Well, again, it filters down into real life. If you just get a sense of some of these basic theological principles, what you do matters. What happens to you, really, again, you have to trust God, be open to again, intentionality here, and realize that, my life does have a role. I am a piece of this larger picture, and I'm going to impact. We see these movies that, what happens if you change one thing in your life? All the things that it changes. It's a Wonderful Life, or some of these other movies. Well, again, that they have a good message, because we don't really think about the way something we do or don't do, how that does ripple through multiple lives. And again, if we just had a sense of that, again, I think it's an important theological point. That's what providence is. And providence isn't God, shooting lightning bolts at people and, that hasn't happened for a while, that's providential. Well, it's much more subtle. It's through the Spirit, it's through human agency, it's through non-human agency. God takes an active interest in what he is trying to do all the time.
And the role of trusting God is so important on our part. And I think throughout these books, especially the main character of Brian, he really drives that home in that every situation he finds himself in, he trusts that is where he's supposed to be, and that is how it's supposed to be unraveling, and he trusts that this is part of what he is supposed to be doing. So I just hope that when people read it, they really focus in on that, because I think it's a really important theme of the story. But there's a lot else going on here, so let's get into some of the nitty-gritty here without giving away too much more about the plot of the book. Obviously, the Ancient Aliens craze is something that's been a focus of your research for a long time. It plays a vital role, particularly in this second novel. Mm-hmm. I have to admit that I have spent a lot of time studying New Age philosophies and being involved in it in one level or the other throughout my life. But I was a latecomer to the revelation, which is kind of odd that I didn't see this, but I was to the revelation that there's very little difference between the theosophical idea of like the ascended masters and the concept that humanity is the product of ancient aliens. Mm-hmm. I guess I just didn't really make the connection that they're the same thing packaged differently. And you talk about that pretty extensively in the book. Speak to that concept and that idea and how these things are connected, and how that sort of unravels in your research.
Mm-hmm. Well, in simplest terms, I mean, the old theosophical idea, of various root races and various epochs of life, only one or two of which really involve life as we think of it on Earth. But again, this whole sort of eon, stages of eons in, advancing toward and including human evolution and beyond. Again, that message, the way Blavatsky and others have sort of sketched that out, if you pay attention to what she's saying, all of this began off-planet. Let's use a phrase like that. Okay, off-planet. And eventually beings from off-planet who are non-Earth, non-terrestrial, non-human, all the things that are other to us, eventually get here, through a variety of circumstances. And you have flood, events, you've got giants. I mean, you've got all this stuff in theosophy, and it's not a repetition of the biblical narrative. It's an inversion in some key ways of the narrative, so that again we don't have all this happening as the result of the act of a creator God or anything like this, but It's other intelligences, and again, they're from out there in space somewhere. Now in her time, she couldn't really talk about, rockets and space travel and all this other stuff, but the content lends itself very easily, very conveniently to the ancient astronaut mythology. And there are various mediatorial figures in this. Fate magazine with the so-called shaver controversy. Mm-hmm. The whole root races idea gets run with on a number of fronts. The content of the Portent deals a lot with how that idea got married to racism, again, in simplest terms, the idea of a master race. And you say, well, ancient astronaut people don't believe in a master race. They're not racist. Well, I'd invite you to go visit my blog. I recently blogged about this, but either mine or Jason Colavito's blog. Any talk of a master race or ancient people not being able to do, especially African people, I don't think that's a coincidence, mm-hmm. not being able to do something technologically, the whole Vedic origin thing about the Aryans and the non-Aryans, it always goes back to the winter civilization came from, extraterrestrials, and they just happen to be white Europeans. Like, wow, how does that work out all the time? Mm-hmm. It's the same thing with the mound builder controversy in North America. The reason why you had the people come over again to the country in the early colonial period, the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, they're coming up with theories to explain these fantastic mounds that are over here in the United States. And again, the popular idea was that some unknown race did this, and if you dig enough in the literature there, you're going to find out it's a non-Indian race, because the supposition was that the Indians were too stupid to do this.
Right.
They weren't technologically able. And even if you give the Incans and the Mayans the credit, well, they had external help too, again, from some unknown, progenitor race. It's just a current that runs through all this. So you get the same ideas, and I don't think, people who put ancient aliens together and appear on the show, I don't think they're all racist or anything like that. My point is that you can take all the data points, all the threads, and produce something like that. And how do we know that? Well, because it was done already. Okay, Aryosophy, again, master race, Aryan ideology with Indo-European origins, which the Germans loved that, and then they wound up even taking it, upping the ante even more, that, well, we're all Europeans, but we're the best ones. And so you get the whole Nazi occult ideology growing out of this. They're ideas that people run with, and the same concatenation of ideas that you'll see undergirding really offensive stuff. You can find easily in the ancient aliens narrative, because they're drawn from the same pool. They just take off in different directions.
Why do you think it is important for Christians in particular to be aware of this theme? Because, it obviously is really crucial, and sometimes we can find some really icky tendrils from that coming into the Christian realm, if that mm-hmm. makes sense. Why is it important for Christians to really understand this?
I think it points, it's one thing of a dozen I could think of. It's one thing that points to the danger of what I'll call over-literalizing the biblical text. These sorts of things, there's a reason why the Bible was used to justify, racial ideas, ideas of racism. It's very easy to understand. It's very normal to understand what happened. Well, you get Genesis, 1 to 11. You get the Tower of Babel. You get the Table of Nations. Well, that's all well and good. We know where all those nations are. Well, in the 1500s, when other continents on the other side of the world are being discovered, lo and behold, there's people over there. And you know what? They're pretty much like us, except for, the skin color and all that. But we've got that over here too, and over in India, they got the same thing. And, the running into the Chinese, where did these people come from? Okay. Age of exploration was huge. in the late 1800s, you had the decipherment of cuneiform and hieroglyphs and things like this. And it's discovered that, wow, there are a lot of other literature out there that have histories and chronologies that are older than the Bible, or they're different than the Bible. Sometimes they overlap. What do we do with that? How does that work? Then of course later Darwin, comes along with all that. So in the 16th, 17th, and 18th, 19th centuries, the church is having to deal with all sorts of really significant issues. And if you go back to, again, the over-literalizing idea, what they did is very understandable, was we have to be able to fit this stuff into literally somehow, because they're stuck on this literal thing. We have to be able to fit this into the Bible somewhere, or else we have to junk the Bible. And so they come out with the wackiest theories about race. Well, Cain, the mark of Cain, he must have been a black guy, and you just read the weirdest stuff. And if we can pull ourselves back for a moment, the reason they come up with it is because they're trying to just come to grips with what's being discovered and keep their Bible. And so when people do that, certain ideas sort of won the day. They became more popular than others. Well, then it becomes an issue of we have to accept this guy's idea, this interpretation. And if we don't, then we're going against Scripture. The idea, the interpretation, the explanation it takes on the same level of authority as the Scripture itself, because to junk one means you junk the other. Again, it's very simplistic, and we look at that and say, well, how could they have thought so poorly? Well, go read your history. They did. They just did. Mm-hmm. And what I'm trying to warn people about, and again, the ancient astronaut elements are the same thing. It really disturbs me that Christians can watch ancient aliens or have an experience or read a book or, Zecharia Sitchin or something like that and say, man, this is just amazing stuff. I need to find this in the Bible somewhere. And they come out with, again, the craziest interpretations, the craziest ideas that again, I'm looking at it as someone who does biblical stuff for a living, thinking, and that just doesn't have a prayer of being right. But in the past, I haven't wanted to say that because I understand why you're doing it. You are doing it so that you don't feel like you have to throw away your faith. You're not getting your questions answered by your pastor. You don't really know where to turn. You don't really know what to look up. You don't really know how to sort of rethink this and how to reprocess, Scripture and what you've been taught. And you've run into this idea, or you've had, again, some experience, or a friend of yours, had some experience. And you're just trying to put it all together in the same pot so that you can cope and go on. I understand that. But again, what the portent allows me to do is, if I'm intelligent evil, I know you're doing that. And I'm going to use that to destroy you. I'm not going to help you. Right. I'm going to use it to destroy you, to undermine what you believe, because I know, again, you're putting all your eggs in this basket. And I'm going to use that in such a way where I win and you don't. And so a lot of the messaging in the book is about that we need to just think well about Scripture. We need to insist on really good evidence. We need to not focus on the speculations that we have about this or that thing, either in the Bible or outside the Bible. I think we need to focus on the meta-narrative, on the messaging. For instance, the UFO, the abduction stuff. Okay, it's really not about having a modern hybrid program. Okay, what it's really about, what the message really is becoming more than human. It's transhumanism. Mm-hmm. It is the next phase of human evolution. It is to be as gods. Okay, these things fix an idea in a person's mind, and they make it acceptable. They make it acceptable to be discontent with the way God made me. They make the idea that this is our natural trajectory, to become like gods. That's a good thing. It's where our destiny lies. It perverts and it subverts biblical theology. So I focus a lot more on the big picture, on the meta-narrative, on the ideas. And a lot of these things that people are writing and throwing out there, I understand why they're doing it. You know, and I'm sympathetic to it because I know you're struggling. You're trying to come up with an answer. But you don't really realize how vulnerable some of these things make you. And it concerns me. So I'm hoping to draw some attention to that.
As you were talking, I thought about a scene in The Portent, and it involves Colonel Ferguson and Brian, and they're interacting, and Brian is expressing his I'm going to just really paraphrase because I don't have it in front of me, but he's expressing his desire to understand Scripture from deriving things from the original text and from the original languages and this type of thing. And Ferguson says something to him along the lines of, "Oh yes, you know, you're divorced from these creeds. Isn't that quaint?" I think is exactly what he says.
He says, "Oh, with you, it's always about the text, isn't it?"
Right. And of course, that's one of those moments where you're like, you know, this is obviously this character is Dr. Heiser, because it's clear that is something that you are obviously just passionate about, and the villain of this book just kind of rolls his eyes at it, but really it's because I think he's threatened by that notion. So
he does turn it full circle, because essentially there's a part of the conversation where he talks about, I mean, it's not necessarily aimed at Brian, but it is aimed at people who care about the text, and that is, we're going to give you your text. We're going to give you what you literally expect, and you'll know, you know, Brian, you will know what we're going to do with it, because we want people to think a certain thought, because that thought will move the herd where we want them to move. And so he tells Brian, I basically know you better than you know you. And they have a little joust where the colonel essentially demonstrates that point. And again, he turns something that Brian would look at like as a virtue, you know. The colonel turns it into a vulnerability. Not necessarily where he'll personally be hurt, but people he cares about will be hurt. So everywhere he goes in this conversation, he gets boxed in. You know, it's really the hinge point of the novel. That dinner meeting is where you find out really what's going on and what's going to go on. I mean, you are with Brian in that seat. Yeah. Because going into the portent, you, the reader, know more than he does about this person that he's talking to. And as bad as the conversation goes for him, you're thinking all sorts of other thoughts as well. And, you know, that's obviously intentional. But again, I'm doing that so that people can sort of put themselves in that seat and get freaked out by it. You know, I don't know another way to put it.
Yeah, and it truly is just an epic scene, and I don't even think we can talk about it anymore without giving too much away, but the scope of it is just, when you read it, you're just kind of, you just can't stop because it's so important, and it's the big reveal. One of the things, let's put our tinfoil hats on really quick, Dr. Heiser. One thing that I mentioned towards the beginning here is that this book touches on so many different topics of interest for me. And, you know, as I have personally evolved, I've shied away from a lot of things that I used to talk about because I myself have kind of pulled myself out of that weird realm of just thinking everything is true that you read on the internet, that all of these grand conspiracies are true. But the really clever thing is that you take some of the most insidious, quote, conspiracies and show how these ones are legitimate. And what I would point to is like MK Ultra, for example. Mm-hmm. That's one of those things where there's just been so much peripheral ridiculousness about it that even the mention of MK Ultra now makes people either roll their eyes or react in a completely wrong-headed way about it, thinking that it relates to a bunch of stuff that it doesn't. Mm-hmm. But I think it would be interesting for the audience to just hear a little bit about what MK Ultra really is, because as you say, all of the documents and all of the historical things that you speak about in the Portent are true. Mm-hmm. So what is MK Ultra?
Well, MK Ultra was an outgrowth of knowledge that we were able to tap into after World War II. It's sort of it's related to the psych side of Paperclip. Paperclip's famous for bringing the rocketry guys over here and with their technology for wingless craft, i.e. flying saucers, and, achieving nuclear power without a reactor and all that kind of stuff. There was a psychological element to this, for people who were in the sciences in that respect, again, in the cognitive sciences. It really grew out of the desire within the military-industrial complex to come up with a truth serum. I didn't put that in the novel, but historically that's where it comes from, and it was thought that something like LSD, for example, would make people susceptible to telling the truth, and if we could figure out how that worked, then we could train our own people to resist that if they were ever given that drug. And it never really worked out, but it opened the door to the fact that you could use certain drugs, you could use certain techniques that involved maybe deliberately traumatizing a person to actually change who they were. In the book, there's a reference to dissociative identity disorder, which is well known in the field of psychology, and the only question, really is for a lot of the people who interact with people who are suffering from dissociative identity disorder is what is the cause, or what was the cause, and was it repetitive? Because if it's repetitive, this is how you can literally create alternate personalities, alternate identities within a person's mind. Again, this isn't mythology. It's not conspiracy theory. This is stuff you'd read about in psychological journals. And it's related, again, to the techniques used in this thing we call MK Ultra, which was just one phase of trying to do this. So it plays a role, certainly in the book. Again, the creation of again, just basically wiring or programming a person to do certain things. Making them, giving them a trigger, and they are sort of helpless because of their programming to resist that. So that again does have a significant role in the book, and I think it comes across pretty viscerally in the book.
It really does, and I have to confess that as I was reading both books, something that kept going through my mind that I was like, I am going to, I think I kind of know where this is going. And the thought of Project Bluebeam came into my mind. Mm-hmm. And, I'm reading it and I'm thinking, oh yeah, this whole thing with Serge Monast and his, theories that he laid out, or his supposed intel that he had about Project Bluebeam. And then I get to the portion of the book where you mention Project Bluebeam, and I find out you pretty much just think it's bunk or that portions of it are unrealistic. And I would just have to agree with that. the points that you make. But it is interesting.
It's useful.
Right.
And I'm not talking about useful to me as something to throw into a novel. Mm-hmm. But for intelligent evil, this is useful.
Absolutely. And that's
very pragmatic.
That's kind of where I came down on that side of it as well. And then another thing that you mentioned that I want you to just kind of explain to the audience what it is or what it means without necessarily saying how it relates to the novel. But speak to us a little bit about what or who are the Collins elite.
Oh, if your readers, I'll explain a little bit briefly about what it is, but if your readers get interested in this, Nick Redfern has a book about the Collins elite that I was actually interviewed for. Kind of an interesting chapter, but I don't want to rabbit trail too much on that. But the Collins elite purports to be a group of, I guess I'll use the word Christians, a group of Christians within the intelligence, military, industrial complex, all those drawn from those areas, those walks of life, or those agencies that specifically came together because they had a common suspicion that UFO stuff back in the 50s was related to the occult. Nick's book on this, he sort of draws heavily from and kind of got started on this because of an interview with a Lutheran pastor named Ray Boucher. And Ray he's a pastor, and he had been contacted by someone who knew of this group, or I don't know that he was specifically claimed to be in it, but knew of the group's existence, and so on and so forth. And then out of that came Nick's book. It's called Final Events, by the way. But this group supposedly was trying to address the UFO stuff from a theological perspective that was very apocalyptic in nature. And in the conversation within the Portent, again, the colonel basically says, oh yeah, that group's real, and it touches with this group and this other group and this thing over here. He has a line in there. I don't know if this is precisely the context, but the colonel just tells Brian, look, we don't really care who ends this fantasy that you call democracy. We don't really care. We don't really care how any of this develops. But there are things that are in the works, this group, that group, even the group from the Facade, that we're just looking at, and if they're doing something that's useful, we'll use it. If they're not, well, whatever. It operates in parallel. I think that a lot of Christians sort of, again, who try to tie the end times in with biblical prophecy and about Nephilim and UFOs and all this other stuff, I think there's a propensity to think, oh, aren't we clever? We've got this figured out. Where what I'm trying to say in the Portent is the intelligent evil that is really in operation operates above this. They use it. It doesn't use them. It doesn't dictate a thing to them. Right. Whatever they deem useful, they're going to use it. So they're just spectating in some sense because they have their own agenda. And, if what's happening over in this little corner of the earth is important to us, good. If it's not, oh well. People are going to die. People die all the time.
Right.
That's a good thing to us. We don't really care. So I try to detach those things a little bit to get people again to think that, we really would not be able to parse the mind of intelligent evil at this level the way we think we can. And so I'm trying to get people to, again, pay attention to the big ideas, the meta-narrative, not our speculations about how things will actually play out and what this particular event means and this particular, item over here means. Think about the messaging. Don't put all your eggs in any one particular basket.
There's a scene where, as you were talking, it chilled me because the main colonel, the main evil guy in the book, he says something along the lines of, we aren't puppies who do bidding. We just do as we please. I do whatever I want, or something along those lines.
There's a scene where someone's going to get hurt pretty badly, and the person who is the victim gets angry and calls the colonel a demon.
Right.
And the colonel just looks at him and says, demons are like puppies. They come when they're called. We do what we want, or I do what I want.
It's so chilling.
It's designed for that, but it also is designed to make a theological point as well.
Mm-hmm. And when we take all of these things, whether it's Ancient Aliens, Collins Elite, MK Ultra, Nazis, Project Paperclip, all of these different and many more things that you speak about in The Portent, I think you make a very good point that the truth is indeed stranger and scarier than anything dreamt up in a wacky conspiracy theorist's mind, right? I mean, the reality of things that have legitimately happened in history are definitely the more intensely frightening than anything that happens in the corners of the internet where people just dream up.
Yeah, I would put it this way: that if you're tying what you think is going on in these, again, all these occult areas and conspiracy areas and whatnot, if you tie all that to one particular Bible interpretation, especially if it's an over-literalized one, there are two dangers to that. One is that if you're completely wrong, then are you going to sort of jump the ship? Are you going to conclude, well, if I was so convinced of this, and if now that I know this is wrong, all this stuff must be wrong? Okay, that's one danger. The other danger is that what you think will happen will play out in front of you, and you'll pat yourself on the back, not realizing that a greater intelligence has planned to manipulate you in precisely this way to get you and your herd to move in a certain direction to another idea. Okay, so we need to just have our senses tuned to our own lack of omniscience. Mm-hmm. And again, I think we can do that if we just keep the big picture in mind. What is the messaging about? The messaging could sort of take form in any number of ways. But it's going to be consistent. Again, what is it that intelligent evil wants us to think and believe? Not necessarily, again, what is this scenario in my head that I can come up with and tie to the Bible so that now I know what's going to happen? Okay, I'm suggesting that makes you vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And if you marry really your world and the way you parse these things to one narrow particular thing, evil is just smarter than that.
Yeah, I think you lay that out quite well in the book. And gosh, I have so much. There's just so much. This book is just chock full of thought-provoking things that I think the readers are going to come away with feeling like they learned a lot, but also they're going to come away with questions. And I noticed that on your website you do have sort of a commentary for people to look at, bibliography and notes. I haven't looked at it personally yet, but I intend to, that goes along with The Portent after you've read it, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Facade, and I should mention, again, people can find the books if they go to my website. It's just DR as in doctor, DRMSH, my initials. You know, how original is that? drmsh.com, and you can click when you see on the slider or on the menu, the Facade and the Portent. The Facade had a sort of a research bibliography in the back. In this latest edition, that has been taken out, and I have it on the web for free if people want to look at the sources I use. Now, for the Portent, I decided to be a little more intentional with this, and I created a handbook that goes chapter by chapter, providing, again, research links. You know, hey, this article that the character referred to about this or that other thing, is that real? Yeah, it actually is. Here it is. That sort of thing. So it's where the novel will give you the breadcrumbs and you start to follow the trail. The handbook, you know, will be really useful for that. So you could go to my website, drmsh.com. You could go to Read the Facade or Read the Portent, and you'll wind up, you know, where you need to go.
Well, I'm really excited to get my hands on that because my mind is just swimming after having read this book, and I really, really recommend that everyone out there take a look at both of these books. You'll come away just having not only, you know, we've talked a bit about evil and intelligent evil and this type of thing, but I actually find them very empowering books, very enlightening books, and actually when it comes to your discussions of Providence and the way these characters interact and the revelations that these characters have, and even right down to some, you know, people having things supernaturally revealed to them, it's something that I think is going to strengthen their faith. And I really thank you for writing these books, Dr. Heiser, and I look forward, trust me, I'm already tapping my foot waiting for the next one.
Well, you used the word empowering, and I think that's important because, and I'm trusting you picked this up, but in the book there's this sense, and I meet so many people like this, that they're tired of playing church. And so part of the book is, and some of the characters, again, that just come together, they're just about, look, we know what needs to get done. We're not going to ask anybody's permission to do it. We're just going to do it. Mm-hmm. And again, that's deliberate as well.
Right. And and the characters have varying, sort of, well, for example, you have the Catholic characters and you have the characters like Dr. Scott who are just very textually oriented and stuff. But ultimately the point is that the gospel is what they have in common. Mm-hmm. And I just found that to be really a potent message. So thank you so much for coming on the show today, Dr. Heiser. I'll put all of the links to how people can get the books, get to your website. Your website has, you mentioned how it wasn't a very creative name. Try having a website called Extraordinary Intelligence and having to explain to why you called it that to every other person that comes to your site. But I'll put the links to all of that in the show notes, and then I really urge people after they've read these books, which I expect they will after hearing you, to come to the show notes and share their thoughts, and also, you know, email Mike Heiser and talk to him on his site about it. I think we would both just really love to hear what everyone has to say, and I will shortly after this be going over to Amazon to put my review down, and obviously that's really important for anyone out there who reads it as well, to go out there and support the author by leaving a review. So thank you again so much. This has been really great, and I hope to talk to you again very soon.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Beyond Extraordinary with Natalina. For the latest headlines and program schedule, please visit extraordinaryintelligence.com.